please consider subscribing. So you want to play Pauper Commander competitively, but you don't know where to start. Well, let's take a look at probably the first general commander that I built and seriously started tuning towards competing in a competitive meta. And I think it's a great place for newer players to start. I think it's a great place for more experienced players to visit. It represents kind of a niche, like little spot in the format, only occupied by itself and a new mono blue commander recently printed at the time of this recording. So let's take an opportunity to look at Crackling Drake and see what you think. So there's two builds. There's two main builds that are out there in the world right now. There's a third. It's being piloted by two different people. I'll start off with that one. That one is a Madness looting style deck. It's more of a mid-range control looty kind of archetype. What the Madness deck does, it's basically a variant of a mid-range control list seeking to loot and gain value off of Madness cards and looting. It's pretty easy. The main two versions, and if I'm honest, they're not really all that different. It's just perspective, right? Both of them are Voltron control decks. It's just a matter of how you want to put that first. One is a control Voltron deck, so like we're splitting hairs. The other one is a Voltron control deck. It's basically the same thing. There's just a slight difference in card choices based off probably play style and preference of each of the pilots. One list being my list, the other list being the world famous and infamous Pauper's Crackles list. Where we differ is I still employ some of those looting style effects and spells, e.g. like Faithless Looting, Careful Study, Frantic Search, those types of things, where he does not. He works on getting creatures onto the battlefield to help like block, essentially, because most lists only play Drake as their only real creature, which is kind of problematic and more of an aggressive meta. But he'll employ specific creature types that allow him to also filter or dig as well. So he gets double use out of them in the fact that he can fill his hand and block at the same time. Mine is a little different in the fact that I'm playing Flood of Recollection in order to buy back a lot of the sweepers that I employ. He's using blockers proactively to deal with the board state. I'm using sweepers to deal with attackers. So we're both doing the same thing. We're just doing it in two very different ways. Instead of playing looting spells, he's playing just fill your hand spells, so card advantage spells to keep his hand full. And that's important. And the reason why that's important is because the Drake player usually falls into the role of table police, which is something that I'll caution you about a little bit later. But because you are chock full of removal, chock full of like draw or selection, you pretty much fill your hand with answers, and people will lean on you to take care of threats. Before we get into how you should be playing the deck, let's take a look at some very specific card choices between myself and Pauper's list. With regard to Ryan's list, he's playing cards like Augur of Bolus, Cruel Witness, let's see, Seagate Oracle, and there's one more, Organ Hoarder. To basically enter the battlefield, be blockers, and provide some value beyond their casting. Instead of those spells, my list, I'm using Drift of Phantasms, which is technically a creature, but also as a tutor, I'm using it to find Breath Weapon and Fiery Cannonade as my sweeper suite, and then using Flood of Recollection as redundancy for that sweeper suite. Say that 5 times fast. So on top of that, instead of playing more creatures, I'm playing cards like Fire Prophecy, the new Izzet Charm, which I'm sure is going to make it into his list eventually, and I'm playing Curfew as forms of removal to basically help clear the battlefield of problem creatures that might be attacking me, seeking to mitigate their value. One last thing, I'm also playing Hard Evidence because it provides me a blocker, but it's also a sorcery, so it adds to that Drake count, if you know what I mean. The last real major differences between mine and Ryan lists is the mana base. We both play approximately the same number of lands. The real difference is he's playing up to 4 various tap lands, e.g., Volatile Ford, Path of Ancestry, Evolving Wilds, and Terramorphic Expanse. These all lend well to the more mid-rangey feel that he's looking for in his list. Myself, I'm choosing to either play just regular basics in the place of those, or I am playing the 2 1-mana cycle lands in color. They'll be up on the screen. That's kind of the main real difference. So that way, there technically are 2 tap lands in my list, but I'm not using them as tap lands. I'm using them as cantrips. That's probably the last real differences between our decks. Now, one interesting piece of tech that Ryan uses that I find interesting, not enough to employ it myself, but I do find it interesting and worth a mention. He's using Glasses of Urza as a means to kind of check in on his opponents to see like where they're at, if they're combo players, if they're close to the combo, or if he wants to employ his Drake or attack with a lethal Drake, he can check to make sure that they don't have spot removal or something of that nature. He can make sure that the coast will be clear either against combo or getting in with the Drake. And as always, and I say as always, but this is like the very first deck tech, the deck lists to both mine and Papa Popper's list will be in the description down below. Lastly, like how do you play this deck, right? Quite frequently, I will see players turn 4, they're lucky enough to hit their 4th land drop or get their 4th mana. Boom, they're jamming Drake. This may or may not be the right way, because at 4 mana value, Drake can become very expensive if removed, 2, 3, 4 times, right? So we want to be in a situation where we're playing the Drake and being able to protect either the casting cost or the casting of that of the Drake, or we can protect it once it's on the battlefield. Yeah, I think Ryan and I would both agree that you don't want to be jamming Crackling Drake out as soon as you can. You want to wait a little while, get sufficient enough instant and sorcery count in the graveyard and or exile. Make sure that you have a hand that complements the casting and the protecting of the Drake, and then in a very weird, like surgical way, at least the best way you can with a club, start whittling away at an opponent until they're dead, next opponent dead, what have you. Meanwhile, controlling the board, or at least controlling the pieces that are dangerous, right? If you start controlling every little piece, you're going to run out of gas pretty soon, and you have to kind of know, you have to do that threat assessment, as we talk about, to know which spells are dangerous, which creatures are dangerous, etc., and try to also leverage your opponent's spells as you can to protect your resources as well. It's part of being a smart 4-pod player. So yeah, this wasn't meant to be necessarily a card for card breakdown of each one of the lists. Some people do that. I figured you would find more value if I briefly just talked about the differences. Everybody has a rough idea of what Drake does, so I didn't want to necessarily insult your intelligence by getting too deep in the weeds. I just really wanted to look at the differences between what the top players, we're just average Joes just like you, but what some of the players in the meta are doing with their particular Drake lists, and basically communicating the validity of those variations between players. So if you have any comments, questions, concerns, by all means, drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think. I'm all about dialogue. This is a process, not a terminal solution. So by all means, let me know what you think, and hopefully I'll see you on the battlefield.